Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. Our guest in studio is Dr. Mark Darrah, President and CEO of Athena GTX. He's here today to discuss the WIMed system, a non-invasive patient assessment system, and why it's important that the medical community at large give it a try and get on board with the many benefits that accompany this new technology. How are you doing today, Dr. Darrah?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Welcome to Health Professional Radio.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as president and CEO of Athena GTX, you're involved in medical treatment in combat situations, in stressful situations, not the normal situations that many of our listeners, being healthcare professionals themselves, are involved in on a day-to-day basis. You are involved in something much more reminiscent of MASH episodes in that type of environment. Am I right in that assumption?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct. That's our primary market right now, and we've just leveraged that over into a technology we call WIMed.
Now, the WIMed system, talk about this technology. It's a non-invasive patient assessment system. First of all, talk about patient assessment and invasive patient assessment as opposed to non-invasive.
Oh, excellent question. Well, it's a clear difference. The invasive patient monitoring would be actually doing something to the patient that penetrates them, like an IV or putting in a catheter to measure blood pressure, intubating them to do oxygen, etc. What we're doing with the WIMed platform, which is short for wireless medicine, is we're providing a patient assessment tool that is totally non-invasive. It attaches to or onto the patient to obtain very unique parameters that allow us to do a complete patient assessment for the purpose of knowing what's going on with the body.
Now, when we're talking about these these invasive methods that the WIMed system basically does away with, we're talking not about chemical detections or biological detections. We're talking about simply those functions of the body, like you say, breathing, blood flow, blood pressure, that sort of thing. Or are we talking about something even more advanced than that?
Well, it's a little bit of each. Mm-hmm. If you think about a thorough patient assessment, certainly, as you mentioned, we want to do breathing. We want to know how the lungs are working. The lungs' primary purpose is to oxygenate the blood. We also want to know how the heart's working. So how well is the heart functioning on a timely basis to produce an oxygenated blood flow to the organs? And then similarly, as the organs and the muscles take in that oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide, which is returned to the lungs, and the patient will breathe that out, and we want to monitor that as well. So we're monitoring everything about the functionality of that patient that does not include things like a blood draw or, an invasive assessment. That is totally outside of what we do.
Now, is this, you say you just leveraged this technology into the WIMed system. Have you improved upon the original design of this system?
Oh, absolutely. So let's take this apart a little bit. So a wireless medicine platform that we create has a series of adaptable or modular components that allows the care provider to apply what he or she needs to the patient's condition. Mm-hmm. That patient's condition could be either a chronic long-term issue like congestive heart failure or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or, even things like diabetes. But we track that over time. The second component is tracking that information. We put it into a HIPAA-compliant database to allow a care provider to look at that data. And then finally, we allow that data to be observed by a care provider that's not with the patient. They can be remote and accessing an encrypted website. They can track their patient. So those components come together in the wireless platform quite nicely.
And you did mention HIPAA compliance. When we're talking about, or are we talking about transmitting this information worldwide or regionally or in an intranet as opposed to an internet?
Right. We're doing the internet, but what we're doing here is we're encrypting and we're using HIPAA guidelines. And if you remember, we come from a world of special forces, so the idea of being non-discoverable is very important to us. Encryption is understood by the company. And in the commercial world, a lot of people are struggling with that. But we leveraged pretty effectively what we had done for the military over into this world. Any access to any website requires you to use a system, and that's one of the biggest growth areas, as you know, right now, and fueling the rapid growth in telehealth is the fact that, you know, we have this internet, or the Internet of Things, if you will.
Now, when it comes to battlefield triage and medical treatment using the WIMed system, are we talking about being able to communicate on the battlefield, you know, from point A to point B, or does everything have to go through a central location located somewhere from the area of operation?
Excellent question, Neal. So there's two things about that. Number one is anything that we do for the military has to be self-contained. So there are times, as you can well imagine, that you cannot transmit, and transmitting would, you know, be equivalent to discoverable. So in some military situations, we have to be self-contained. All of the smart technologies that we put into the WIMed platform reside right there at the patient's side with the medic or the corpsman that's rendering the care. The same could be held true for the civilian world. There are areas, I'm from Des Moines, Iowa, there's areas in remote Iowa that don't have internet connectivity. So in those cases, we want to store that information until that link can be established to send that information. What's different about WIMed is it stores the information waiting for the connection. And then once that's established, it catches back up at a very rapid rate.
And are we talking about jumping from cell tower to cell tower if, say, in remote Iowa, you're traveling for hundreds of miles?
Well, it could, but it's all seamless to the operator.
Okay.
So once you've established that connection, it will transmit the information. For instance, right now our technology is transmitting at a minute worth of data per second. So it doesn't need a very long time frame of connectivity to be able to catch the care provider.
Now, you mentioned that the WIMed platform is adaptable to the civilian world just as easily as it services the military and combat scenarios. Now, why is it so important that the civilian medical world get on board and give this a try and hopefully begin to implement it much more in their practices?
It's a change. We're seeing a worldwide change right now on technology. Telemedicine is probably, you know, in some of the research that I've done, it's probably the biggest trend in digital health that we've seen in this past year. But what's fueling that, I think, is more important. So we know, for instance, that demand drives market. So we see physicians now that can offer a good experience using telemedicine, such as the WIMed platform. So if they can have a good experience with it, they can connect with the patient, they can do much more than they've ever been able to do before. Why? Faster internet connections, better software, smoother video chatting, you know, access consultations from anywhere. They can bring in peers or subject matter experts on electronic health records. All this is exploding. So I think that's driving the market. But there's another thing here, which I think is really important that people sometimes don't see. What's happening in the whole idea of connectivity is the fastest growing demographic for social media and use of the internet is the over 68 years old age group.
Huh. Wow.
They're no longer technology adverse. You know, these are people that feared cell phones 10 or 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
But now that's the group that's really moving. So as they are no longer as technology adverse, they're starting to like the idea of not having to leave the house to see a doctor. So that's driving demand too. And the third part of that is obviously payment. There's so many states now with parity rules that, you know, if you can render treatment to a patient like and similar to as if being there in person, we'll go ahead and reimburse you for that. And I think we're heading in that direction. So those three things are really fueling the use of WIMed type technology.
Great. And where can our listeners get more information about Athena GTX and the WIMed system?
Certainly on our website, or I'm available anytime to fill in more details. We are right now out in heavy beta trial tests, and we have a lot of support for it. So we'll have some great evidence-based medicine on outcomes pretty soon as well.
Thanks, Mark. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. We've been in studio today talking with Dr. Mark Darrah. He's been here with us today talking about the importance of the WIMed system, this newly developed wireless non-invasive patient assessment system. Talking about the benefits and the importance that the medical community, civilian medical community at large, get on board, give this a try, and begin to implement it in their practices and facilities, hopefully worldwide. It's been a pleasure talking with you today, Mark.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciated it.
Thank you. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.